Intro, the Emperor's Diary. Welcome back. Before we dive into the mind of a Roman emperor, a quick note, you will find a link to Meditations by Marcus Aurelius in the description below. If you want to buy the book, please buy it from our link. It will not cost you anything, but it will help us to get financial freedom, which will help the channel a lot. Thanks for your support. Now, let us step back to 180 AD and uncover the first life-changing concept from the most powerful man who ever lived. Chapter 1. The Inner Citadel, Controlling the Uncontrollable. Imagine having absolute power. You can command armies, shape the global economy, and decide the fate of millions with a single word. That was the reality for Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome. Yet, when he sat down by candlelight in his war tent to write his private thoughts, he didn't write about his vast wealth or his military might. He wrote about how incredibly little control he actually had over the world around him. This brings us to the first life-changing concept of Meditations, the creation of the inner citadel. Marcus realized that the universe is in a constant state of flux. People will betray you, bodies will fall ill, and wealth can vanish overnight. These are external events. His core philosophy, the bedrock of his meditations, can be summarized in one of his most famous realizations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. To Marcus, spending energy worrying about the weather, the opinions of others, or the inevitable decay of the body was a waste of life. Instead, he believed we must build an inner citadel, a fortress of the mind. When chaos strikes externally, we retreat into this citadel, focusing solely on the things we have absolute control over, our own choices, our own judgments, and our own character. That is the theory. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But let us look at how Marcus and those who follow his teachings today actually put this into practice when the world is burning down around them. Let us move from theory into reality. How do you build this inner citadel when life hits you hard? We are going to look at 3 profound case studies. 2 straight from the bloody, plague-ridden life of Marcus Aurelius himself, and 1 from a modern perspective to show you exactly how to apply this concept today. Case study 1. The Antonine Plague and modern crisis management during Marcus's reign. Rome was hit by the Antonine Plague. It was a catastrophic pandemic, likely smallpox, that killed millions. At its height, historians estimate that up to 2,000 Romans were dying every single day. The streets were filled with carts carrying the dead. The economy collapsed. The military was decimated. As the emperor, the entire weight of this apocalyptic scenario fell on his shoulders. People were panicking, pointing fingers, and abandoning their duties. How did Marcus apply his philosophy of the inner citadel here? He recognized exactly where the line of control was drawn. He could not cure the plague. He could not stop the microscopic spread of the disease. If he focused his emotional energy on the tragedy of the death toll, he would have been paralyzed by despair. Instead, meditation shows him aggressively focusing on his own response. He sold the imperial palace's treasures to fund the state. He stayed in Rome when others fled. He focused on duty, organization, and maintaining his own moral compass. He wrote to himself, "The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing." Application for today. Think about the global disruptions, economic downturns, or personal health crises we face today. The 80-20 application of this Stoic rule means spending 20% of your time acknowledging the facts of the crisis and 80% of your time mapping out your immediate controllable actions. If you lose your job due to a failing economy, the market is the plague. You cannot control the market. Your inner citadel dictates that you immediately pivot to what you can control. Updating your resume, learning a new skill for 2 hours a day, and strictly managing your personal budget. You stop wrestling with the invisible economy and start wrestling with your own daily habits. Case study 2. The betrayal of Avidius Cassius. In the year 75 AD, Marcus faced something even more personal than a plague. A rumor spread across the empire that Marcus had died. Hearing this, one of his most trusted generals, a man named Avidius Cassius, declared himself the new emperor. He conquered an entire region of the Roman Empire, including Egypt, which was Rome's crucial breadbasket. When Marcus found out he was still alive and had been betrayed by a close friend, he had every right as a Roman emperor to be enraged. Previous emperors would have burned cities to the ground in a paranoid fury, but Marcus retreated to his inner citadel. He wrote extensively in his diary about the nature of people. Begin the morning by saying to thyself, "I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." Marcus did not respond with rage. He responded with profound, chilling calmness. He marched his army to confront Cassius, but he told his soldiers that his goal was not to kill the traitor, but to capture him alive. Why? So Marcus could show the world what it looked like to forgive a traitor. He wanted to use the betrayal as an opportunity to practice virtue. He controlled his judgment of the event. To him, the betrayal wasn't a catastrophe. It was an arena to practice his philosophy. Application for today. This is the ultimate framework for handling toxic people, backstabbing co-workers, or painful breakups. When someone betrays you, your immediate reaction is anger, an external focus. To apply Marcus's method today, you flip the script. You view the betrayal not as a tragedy that happened to you, but as a test presented for you. Your co-worker steals your credit for a project. That is Avidius Cassius. You cannot control their lack of integrity, but you can control your response. You document your work meticulously. You handle yourself with professional grace. You do not gossip. You turn their malice into your opportunity to demonstrate unwavering professionalism professional character. You win by not becoming like them. Case study 3, the daily annoyances. The modern experiment. Let's look at a personal modern experiment you can run today based on Book 4 of Meditations. Marcus repeatedly reminded himself that it is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our judgment of those things. Remove the judgment, and you have removed the thought, I am hurt. Remove the thought, I am hurt, and the hurt itself is removed. Try the traffic jam experiment this week. Next time you are stuck in gridlock traffic or standing in an impossibly long line at the grocery store, monitor your mind. The default human reaction is frustration. You grip the steering wheel, you sigh, your blood pressure spikes. Now build the Citadel. The external event is the traffic. Can you control it? No. What is your judgment? Your judgment is, this is wasting my time, this is terrible. Marcus would tell you to remove that judgment. The traffic is objectively neutral. It is just metal boxes on asphalt. By dropping the judgment that this is bad, you reclaim that time. Turn on a podcast. Breathe. Observe the people around you. When you successfully sit in a traffic jam without a single spike of anger, you are practicing the same mental discipline Marcus Aurelius used to govern the Roman Empire. You are mastering what is yours and ignoring what is not. To chapter 2, the blazing fire, loving your fate. Amor, Fati. Welcome to chapter 2. In the first chapter, we learn how Marcus Aurelius built an inner citadel to protect his mind from what he could not control. But what happens when the things outside your control are not just annoying, but deeply painful? What happens when your plans are destroyed? This brings us to the second life-changing concept from Meditations, the principle of turning obstacles into fuel. While the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche later coined the term Amor, Fati, a love of one's fate, the exact blueprint for this mindset was written by Marcus Aurelius centuries earlier. Marcus believed that it was not enough to merely tolerate a difficult situation. Gritting your teeth and enduring the pain is a defensive strategy. Marcus played offense. He wrote one of the most powerful metaphors in human history. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He compared a strong mind to a blazing fire. If you throw a small weak spark onto a pile of trash, it will be smothered. But if you have a roaring massive bonfire, it does not matter what you throw into it. It consumes it. A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. The concept here is a radical acceptance. You do not just accept the traffic jam, the job loss, or the illness. You actively embrace it as the exact material you need to practice virtue, patience, and courage. If the universe hands you a problem, that problem is your new purpose. Let us move back into the 80% application phase. Theory is easy, but how do we build a fire that burns so hard it consumes our worst days? Let's look at 2 intense historical case studies from Marcus's life, and 1 practical experiment you can begin today. Case study 1, the Marcomannic Wars and the Muddy Frontier. If Marcus Aurelius had a choice, he never would have been a military commander. At his core, he was an intellectual. He loved reading, philosophy, and the warm, civilized culture of Rome. Yet fate had a different plan. For the last decade of his life, Germanic tribes relentlessly attacked the northern borders of the Roman Empire along the Danube River. Marcus was forced to leave the comforts of Rome and spend years living in freezing, muddy, brutal military camps in what is now modern-day Austria and Hungary. He was surrounded by violence, crude soldiers, disease, and the constant threat of assassination or defeat. How did he apply the principle of the blazing fire? He could have complained bitterly about his stolen years. He could have delegated the war to his generals and stayed in his palace. Instead, he embraced the miserable frontier as his fate. He recognized that this dark, cold environment was the exact place he needed to test his philosophy. It was precisely here, in the blood and mud of the Marcomannic Wars, sitting alone in his general's tent at night, that he wrote Meditations. The greatest work of Stoic philosophy exists because of his misery, not despite it. The war was the obstacle, and the war became the way. Application for today: this is the ultimate framework for dealing with the season of life you hate. Perhaps you are stuck in a dead-end job with a terrible boss, or you are living in a city you despise because you have to care for a sick relative. Your instinct is to act like wet wood, to let the situation extinguish your happiness and complain about what you are missing. To apply Marcus's method, you must reframe the obstacle. This terrible job is no longer a prison. It is a gymnasium for your character. It is where you are actively learning patience, diplomacy, and resilience. If you want to start a business, the strict hours of your current job become the fuel that forces you to wake up at 5:30 a.m. to work on your side hustle. You use the friction to create heat. Case study 2, the falling leaves and the loss of children. We must talk about the darkest reality of Marcus's life to truly understand the depth of his philosophy. Today, losing a child is an unimaginable tragedy. In ancient Rome, infant mortality was high, but the pain was just as devastating. Marcus and his wife Faustina had 13 or 14 children together. Only a few lived to see adulthood. He had to bury child after child, including his beloved twin boys. If anyone had the right to curse the gods, to give up, or to become a bitter, tyrannical ruler, it was a father who had buried so many of his own children. Yet Marcus turned to his philosophy to survive the crushing grief. In Meditations, he writes about observing the natural world to understand loss. He quotes the poet Homer, noting that human lives are like leaves on a tree. The wind blows them down in the autumn, and the tree buds new ones in the spring. He deeply internalized that death is not an evil punishment targeted at him. It is a fundamental, inescapable law of nature. He wrote, "To fear death is to fear a natural process. He loved his children fiercely, but he trained himself to love them with the understanding that they were mortal and given to him only for a short time. He didn't let grief extinguish his fire. He absorbed the agonizing pain and used it to fuel his empathy for the suffering of his citizens, becoming a more just and compassionate emperor. Application for today. Applying this to modern grief, heartbreak, or massive personal loss is incredibly difficult but deeply life-changing. When a relationship ends or a loved one passes, the pain is a fact. But the Stoic approach asks you to accept the natural cycles of life. Everything is temporary. When you lose something precious, you do not curse the universe for taking it away. You actively express gratitude that it was given to you at all. You take the raw, agonizing energy of that loss and channel it into being more present with the people who are still here. You let the grief make you softer, more empathetic, and more awake to the precious shortness of life, rather than letting it make you cold and bitter. Case study 3. The Ruined Plans, Modern Experiment. Here is your second practical experiment, based entirely on turning an obstacle into fuel. Let us call it the Ruined Plans Protocol. Think of a time your plans were suddenly destroyed. You arrive at the airport and your flight is cancelled. You planned a beautiful outdoor wedding and it pours rain. You launch a new product and the website crashes on day 1. The default human reaction is to panic, throw a tantrum, or fall into despair. You fight reality. You scream at the gate agent who has no power to fix the airplane. This week, when something inevitably goes wrong, you are going to practice being the blazing fire. The moment the plan is ruined, pause, acknowledge the obstacle. Then ask yourself one question. What new action does this obstacle make possible? If your flight is cancelled, you now have 5 unexpected hours. That is your fuel. You can finally read that book you brought. You can call an old friend you haven't spoken to in years. Or you can practice the rare art of sitting completely still and observing the chaos of the airport without letting it touch your inner citadel. If your website crashes, it is not a disaster. It is a stress test that forces you to fix a critical bug before your company scales to 1 million users. When you start looking at ruined plans as hidden advantages, the universe can no longer hurt you. Everything that happens to you, good or bad, just becomes more wood for your fire. In Chapter 3, The Ticking Clock. Remembering you must die. Memento Mori. Welcome to Chapter 3. We have built the inner citadel to protect our minds. We have ignited the blazing fire to consume our obstacles. Now, we confront the most sobering yet liberating concept in all of Marcus Aurelius' writings. It is the ultimate antidote to anxiety, ego, and the desperate pursuit of fame. This brings us to the third life-changing concept from Meditations. Memento Mori, the Latin phrase meaning, remember you must die. It sounds morbid, perhaps even depressing, but for Marcus Aurelius, meditating on his own mortality was not a pessimistic exercise. It was the ultimate tool for radical clarity. As the emperor of Rome, he was surrounded by sycophants, statues carved in his image, and people treating him as a living god. It would have been incredibly easy to lose himself in his own ego. Instead, he constantly reminded himself of his impending erasure. He wrote, Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both. Marcus looked at the emperors who ruled before him, Augustus, Hadrian, Trajan, and realized that their fierce battles, their anxieties, and their glories were all buried in the dirt. He understood that fame is fleeting, and posthumous glory is meaningless, because the people who remember you will also soon be dead. The core concept here is this. Acknowledging the absolute certainty of death strips away everything that does not matter. It forces you to stop procrastinating on your own character development. As he famously wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do we take a concept as heavy as death and use it to actually improve our lives today? Let us examine 2 profound historical reflections from Marcus's diary, followed by a powerful modern experiment you can implement immediately. Case study 1. The Illusion of Fame and the Ghost of Augustus. In Book 8 of Meditations, Marcus specifically reflects on the court of Augustus, the first and perhaps greatest Roman emperor. Augustus had everything: a brilliant wife, powerful advisors, immense wealth, and global dominance. Marcus forces himself to picture that bustling, vibrant royal court. Then he applies the Memento Mori lens. He writes down the brutal reality that the entire court is dead. They are dust. Marcus was currently sitting in that same position of ultimate power. People were cheering his name in the Colosseum. Yet, he actively trained his brain to view his own current reality as a future ghost story. He realized that seeking fame or worrying about his legacy was like a dog chasing a bone that had already been thrown off a cliff. He wrote, words once in common use now sound archaic, and the names of the famous dead are too. All fade, all quickly became legend, and soon an absolute oblivion covers them. Application for today. This is the ultimate cure for the modern disease of social media anxiety and the endless pursuit of status. Today we stress over how many likes a post gets, whether our job title sounds prestigious enough on LinkedIn, or what our neighbors think of our new car. We are building digital empires of ego. Applying Marcus's Memento Mori means stepping back and looking at your anxieties through the lens of 100 years. A century from now, no one will care about your Instagram following. No one will remember the awkward thing you said at a networking event. When you realize your fame and reputation are destined for oblivion, it frees you to stop living for the applause of others and start living for your own internal moral compass. You stop performing and you start living. Chapter 4. The Hive and the Bee. Navigating Toxic People. Welcome to Chapter 4. Up to this point, our script has focused heavily on the internal world, building your mental fortress, turning your personal obstacles into fuel, and facing your own mortality. But Marcus Aurelius did not live in a cave. He was the CEO of the ancient world. He was surrounded by politicians, generals, foreign diplomats, and millions of citizens. And just like today, many of those people were greedy, deceitful, and relentlessly toxic. This brings us to our next major concept from Meditations, the principle of interconnectedness and managing the malice of others. Marcus believed deeply in the Stoic concept of cosmopolitanism, the idea that all human beings are part of a single rational community. He frequently used the metaphor of a physical body. He wrote, "We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural." He extended this to the metaphor of a beehive, famously writing, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings no benefit to the bee." The 20% concept here is that you cannot hate the people who wrong you without damaging yourself. Marcus realized that expecting the world to be completely free of toxic people is not just foolish, it is demanding the impossible. There will always be liars and cheats, but instead of letting their toxicity infect his inner citadel, he developed a radical system of empathy and psychological armor. He trained himself to view malicious people not as enemies to be crushed, but as flawed humans who were essentially sick or blind to the truth. Let us shift into our 80% application phase. Theory is beautiful, but how do you actually maintain your composure when someone is actively trying to sabotage your career or ruin your day? Let us examine two specific psychological frameworks Marcus used to survive the venomous Roman political landscape, followed by an experiment you can use during your next difficult interaction. Case study 1. The premeditation of evils. The morning routine. If you think modern workplace politics are vicious, imagine the Roman imperial court. Assassinations via poison, whispered conspiracies, and backstabbing were the standard methods of career advancement. Every single day, Marcus had to interact with ambitious senators who smiled to his face while plotting behind his back. How did he avoid becoming permanently paranoid or enraged? He used a technique called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, and he did it the moment he woke up. In Book 2 of Meditations, we find one of the most famous passages he ever wrote. It was his daily morning routine. Begin the morning by saying to thyself, "I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." He did not wake up hoping everyone would be nice to him. He actively expected them to be terrible. Why? Because frustration is the gap between expectation and reality. If you expect your coworkers to be perfectly honest and they betray you, you are shocked and furious. But if you mentally prepare for betrayal over your morning coffee, when the betrayal actually happens at 2000 p.m., you are completely unfazed. You say, right on schedule, I expected this. He armored himself with realistic expectations, removing the sting of surprise. Application for today. Think about your upcoming family holiday dinner or your weekly team meeting at work. You already know which uncle is going to make an offensive comment. You already know which coworker is going to try to take credit for your slides. Stop walking into these situations with naive optimism. Apply Marcus's morning routine. Spend 5 minutes anticipating the exact toxic behaviors you will encounter. Visualize them happening. When you pre-accept the annoyance, you rob the toxic person of their power to ruin your emotional state. You'll become an observer of their bad behavior rather than a victim of it. Chapter 5. The Dawn Watch, Duty, Discipline, and the Purpose of Getting Out of Bed. Welcome to Chapter 5. Thus far, we have built mental fortresses and learned to navigate the toxicity of the world. But what happens when the enemy is not an invading army, a failing economy, or a backstabbing co-worker? What happens when the enemy is simply your own warm blanket on a cold morning? This brings us to one of the most famously relatable concepts in all of meditations, the philosophy of duty, discipline, and your natural purpose. It is incredibly comforting to know that the most powerful man in the world struggled to get out of bed. In Book 5, Marcus Aurelius writes a literal argument between himself and his own laziness. He writes, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work. As a human being, what do I have to complain about? If I'm going to do what I was born for, or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm?" His internal voice argues back, "But it's nicer here," to which Marcus sharply replies, "So you were born to feel nice, instead of doing things and experiencing them? Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants and spiders and bees going about their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best they can? And you're not willing to do your job as a human being?" The 20% concept here is that discipline is not a punishment. To the Stoics, every living thing has a specific nature and a purpose, a logos. A bee's purpose is to pollinate. A dog's purpose is to guard or hunt. A human's purpose is to act rationally, contribute to the community, and do the work in front of them. Rejecting your daily duties because you feel tired is a literal rejection of your own humanity. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do we take this ancient philosophical guilt trip and turn it into an unstoppable engine for modern discipline? Let us look at two intense historical case studies of Marcus fighting his own exhaustion, followed by a powerful experiment you can run the very next time your alarm clock rings. Case study 1. The prescription of Galen and the cold camp. We often picture Roman emperors lounging on silk pillows, eating grapes. That was not Marcus Aurelius. Historical records show that Marcus was physically frail. He suffered from chronic stomach ulcers, chest pains, and severe insomnia. His personal physician was Galen, one of the most famous medical minds of antiquity. Galen frequently prescribed Marcus a medicinal compound called theriac, which contained a small amount of opium, just to help the emperor manage his chronic pain and get to sleep. Now, imagine his reality. He is in his late 50s. He is sick. He is likely experiencing withdrawal symptoms from his medicine. He is sleeping in a military tent in Carnuntum, a Roman legionary fortress in modern-day Austria, where the winter temperatures regularly drop below freezing. When his morning alarm, the sounding of the military trumpets, goes off, he has every excuse in the world to stay in bed. He is the emperor. No one can fire him. He is ill. He has a valid medical excuse. It is freezing outside. Yet this is exactly the environment where he wrote his famous passage about the ants and the bees. He didn't rely on motivation. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. He relied on duty. He forced his aging, aching body out of the cot because the Roman legions needed to be commanded, supply lines needed to be managed, and justice needed to be administered. He decoupled his actions from his feelings. Application for today? Think about your relationship with the snooze button. The modern world tells us that if we feel tired, we should rest, and that comfort is the highest form of self-care. The Stoic application is a radical departure from this. When your alarm goes off at 6,000 a.m. to go to the gym or to work on your business, your brain will flood you with excuses. I didn't sleep well. It's cold. I can do it tomorrow. You must apply Marcus's framework. Recognize that the voice asking for comfort is the voice of decay. When you hit the snooze button, you are subconsciously telling yourself that unconsciousness is better than your actual life. You are rejecting your role in the hive. Tomorrow morning when the alarm rings, do not ask yourself how you feel. Feelings do not matter at 6:00 a.m. Ask yourself what your duty is, and then put your feet on the floor. Read Chapter 6, The Boundary of Now, Defeating the Anxiety of the Future. Welcome to Chapter 6. We have built our discipline and learned to handle toxic people. But what happens when the toxic entity ruining your peace of mind isn't a person but a timeline? What happens when you are paralyzed by the dread of tomorrow, next month, or next year? This brings us to one of the most vital concepts in Marcus Aurelius' meditations, confining yourself to the present and defeating the anxiety of the future. If anyone had a legitimate reason to be paralyzed by anxiety, it was a Roman emperor. Marcus had to worry about the collapse of the global economy, the shifting loyalty of his generals, and the constant threat of border invasions. Yet, he realized that anxiety is essentially a malfunction of the imagination. You are suffering from things that have not happened yet and may never happen. His 20% core concept here is profound in its simplicity. The past is gone and cannot be altered. The future does not exist yet. Therefore, the only thing you actually possess and the only place you can actually be hurt is the present moment. He wrote to himself, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." He believed in drawing a hard boundary around now. He told himself not to let the panorama of his entire life oppress him, and not to dwell on all the various troubles which might occur, but to ask himself in the present moment, what is there in this work which I cannot endure? Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do we take this ancient wisdom and use it to dismantle modern anxiety? Let us look at two massive historical crises. Marcus navigated by staying in the present, followed by a powerful cognitive experiment you can use the next time your mind starts spiraling into panic. Case study 1. The Parthian War and the Panic of Rome. Early in Marcus's reign, the Roman Empire was blindsided. The Parthian Empire, a massive superpower to the east, unexpectedly invaded Roman Syria, utterly destroying a Roman legion and killing the provincial governor. When the news reached Rome, the city fell into a collective panic. Citizens were terrified that the Parthians would march all the way to Italy. Politicians were catastrophizing, imagining the complete fall of the empire. The future looked like an absolute nightmare. How did Marcus apply the boundary of the present? If he had allowed his mind to live in the terrifying future the senators were imagining, he would have been incapable of leading. Instead, he forced his mind back to the immediate present. He could not fight the entire Parthian war on a Tuesday afternoon in Rome. What could he do that afternoon? He could calmly draft a response. He could deploy his co-emperor Lucius Verus to the east. He could send his best generals, Statius Priscus and Avidius Cassius, to take command of the tactical front. He broke an overwhelming apocalyptic future into a series of highly manageable, present-tense decisions. He did not ask, how will Rome survive the next 10 years? He asked, what is the next rational step I must take right now? By ignoring the terrifying panorama of the future, Rome successfully pushed back the Parthians and won the war. Application for today. This is the exact blueprint for handling overwhelming modern crises, such as a devastating medical diagnosis, a looming bankruptcy, or a massive career shift. When you receive bad news, your brain instantly time travels. You imagine the worst case scenario 5 years down the road, and your body reacts with a full-blown panic attack. You are fighting a ghost. To apply Marcus's method, you must verbally call yourself back to the present. If you are facing a massive debt, do not look at the staggering total and panic about how you will survive retirement. Draw the boundary of now. What is the action required today? Today you can cancel 3 subscriptions. Today you can call the bank to negotiate a rate. You fight the war one day at a time, completely refusing to let tomorrow's imaginary battles drain today's energy. Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage, Wealth, Luxury, and True Value. If you look at the problems we face today, debt, overworking, stress, and the endless pursuit of the next promotion, a massive portion of that anxiety is tied directly to money and material possessions. This brings us to a fascinating dynamic in Meditations. Marcus Aurelius was technically the wealthiest human being on the planet. The entire treasury of the Roman Empire was at his disposal. He had access to the finest foods, the most massive palaces, and garments woven from gold. Yet, his diary is filled with warnings about the absolute emptiness of luxury. The 20% core concept for this chapter is the Stoic idea of preferred indifference. Marcus did not believe that money was inherently evil. He preferred to be wealthy rather than starving, hence, it is a preferred state. However, he firmly believed that wealth was entirely indifferent to his character. Having $1 billion does not make you a good person, and losing $1 billion does not make you a bad one. Marcus realized that luxury is a trap. When you surround yourselves with softness, your mind becomes soft. When you attach your identity to the things you own, those things eventually end up owning you. You become terrified of losing them. Maintained his inner citadel while sitting on a literal throne of gold, Marcus developed psychological tools to strip the illusion of value away from material goods. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do you live in a consumer-driven, hyper-capitalist society without becoming enslaved by your desire for more stuff? Let us look at 2 brilliant techniques Marcus used to handle absolute wealth, followed by a highly effective experiment you can run this weekend. Study 1. The Stripping Method and the Imperial Robe. In Book 6 of Meditations, Marcus reveals his personal mental trick for not being seduced by the extreme luxury of the imperial palace. Let's call it the stripping method. When a lavish banquet was set before him, he did not allow himself to be swept away by the presentation. He would literally deconstruct the luxury in his mind. He wrote, "When we have meat before us and such eatables, we receive the impression that this is the dead body of a fish and this is the dead body of a bird or of a pig." He did the same thing with the ultimate symbol of his power, the imperial purple robe, a garment so expensive that only the emperor was legally allowed to wear it. Instead of feeling arrogant when he put it on, he told himself, "This purple robe is just sheep's wool, dyed with the blood of a shellfish." He looked at his vintage Falernian wine and reminded himself it was just fermented grape juice. He actively stripped away the marketing, the prestige, and the human opinions attached to these items, reducing them to their bare, unimpressive physical components. Application for today: this is the ultimate weapon against modern marketing and lifestyle envy. When you see an advertisement for a 100,000 luxury watch, your brain is sold a story about status, success, and sexual appeal. Apply Marcus's stripping method. What is that watch? Objectively, it is a small piece of steel, glass, and some moving gears that performs the same function as the clock on your microwave. When you see someone driving a 200,000 sports car, strip away the brand logo. It is just metal, plastic, and rubber burning ancient dinosaur bones to move from point A to point B. By stripping the prestige away from the object, you instantly destroy your desire for it. You keep your money, and more importantly, you keep your peace of mind. Chapter 8. The View from Above. Shrinking your problems to size. Welcome to Chapter 8. If you have followed the script thus far, you have built an incredibly resilient internal framework. But occasionally, a problem arises that feels so massive, so all-consuming, that your inner citadel feels like it might crack under the pressure. When Marcus Aurelius felt completely overwhelmed by the crushing weight of ruling the Roman Empire, he used a highly specific psychological exercise to instantly dissolve his anxiety. Modern philosophers refer to it as the view from above, or Plato's view. This is our next core concept, achieving ultimate perspective by radically shifting your vantage point. Marcus trained his mind to literally zoom out. In Meditations, he commands himself to look down at the earth from the stars. He wrote, "Watch and see the courses of the stars as if you were running alongside them, and continually dwell in your mind upon the changes of the elements into one another. You can strip away the many superfluous things and trouble you, and you will make a large room for yourself if you embrace in your thought the whole universe." The 20% concept here is that the size of your problem is entirely relative to the size of your perspective. When you are zoomed in tightly on a single argument, a late bill, or a spilled cup of coffee, it fills your entire field of vision. It feels catastrophic. But Marcus realized that by elevating his mind to a cosmic altitude, looking down at the tiny, fragile rock of Earth, all human drama, including his own absolute imperial power, was reduced to the size of a grain of sand. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do we use the cosmos to solve our Monday morning stress? Let us look at 2 ways. Marcus used this macroscopic view to manage global crises, followed by a profound modern experiment you can use to shrink your biggest anxieties today. Case Study 1. The ant farm of global war. As we know, Marcus spent the last decade of his life fighting the Marcomannic Wars along the freezing Danube River. This was a brutal, existential conflict for Rome. Hundreds of thousands of men were mobilized. The logistics, the blood, and the territorial disputes were the most important things in the world to the generals around him, but Marcus refused to let the war consume his perspective. While his commanders were obsessing over a few miles of muddy forest, Marcus zoomed out. He wrote about looking down at armies clashing and realizing they were no different than a swarm of ants fighting over a crumb of bread. He wrote, to look at the whole earth and the various activities on it, gatherings of armies, agricultural laborers, marriages, divorces, births, deaths, a mixture of all things and an order composed of contraries. By taking the view from above, he did not become apathetic to the war, but he stripped it of its world-ending terror. He saw that across the globe at that exact second, people were getting married, babies were being born, and farmers were planting crops. The war was just a tiny, temporary fraction of the human experience. This massive shift in perspective allowed him to command his troops with cool, detached rationality, rather than acting out of sheer panic or bloodlust. He conquered lands while simultaneously realizing that the land he conquered was infinitesimally small. Application for today: think about the workplace drama or industry competition that currently stresses you out. You might be fighting a brutal corporate battle for market share or arguing with a neighbor over a property line. Your brain treats this as a life or death survival scenario. You must apply Marcus's ant farm perspective. Zoom out. Look at your city, then your country, then the globe. At this exact second, billions of people do not know your name, do not care about your company's Q3 earnings, and have never heard of your neighbor. Your conflict is a microscopic friction on a tiny planet. When you truly internalize how insignificant the dispute is on a cosmic scale, your blood pressure drops. You can still do your job and solve the problem, but you stop sacrificing your soul to do it. Chapter 9. The Rushing River. Transience and the Art of Letting Go. Welcome to Chapter 9. We have built our fortresses, managed our daily disciplines, and zoomed out to view our lives from the stars. But there is one fundamental force of nature that no fortress can withstand and no amount of discipline can pause. This brings us to one of the most poetic and emotionally challenging concepts in meditations, the river of time and the absolute impermanence of all things. Marcus Aurelius frequently drew upon the ancient philosopher Heraclitus, who famously said that no man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he is not the same man. Marcus adopted this metaphor to survive the crushing losses of his own life. He wrote, time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong is its current. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by and another takes its place, and this too will be swept away. The 20% core concept here is that suffering is caused by clinging. We suffer because we try to freeze the river. We try to hold on to our youth, our past successes, our relationships, and our health, pretending they are permanent fixtures. Marcus realized that expecting permanence in a universe defined by constant change is a form of madness. True peace is found not in stopping the river, but in learning to float upon it, accepting that every beautiful and terrible thing in your life is just passing through. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do we stop clinging to the past and learn to let go gracefully? Let us look at two profound historical case studies from Marcus's diary, followed by a highly effective modern experiment you can use to unburden yourself today. Case study 1. The Ghost Cities of the Ash. When Marcus wanted to remind himself of the absolute transience of the world, he did not just look at old men dying, he looked at entire civilizations that had vanished. In Book 4 of Meditations, he writes to himself, continually reflect on all that has happened, whole cities that have died, Hellas, Pompeii, Herculaneum, and countless others. Pompeii and Herculaneum were glittering jewels of the Roman world, filled with wealthy citizens, beautiful art, and bustling markets. In the year 79 AD, roughly 40 years before Marcus was born, Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried those cities under millions of tons of superheated ash in a single afternoon. Marcus used these dead cities as a profound psychological tool. If an entire mountain can explode and erase a thriving metropolis in 24 hours, how foolish is it to cling to a specific job title, a piece of jewelry, or a childhood home? He did not write about Pompeii to make himself depressed. He wrote about it to force himself to let go of his attachments. He recognized that the Roman Empire itself was just another Pompeii, waiting for its own eventual burial by time. Application for today? This is a vital framework for navigating major life transitions. Perhaps you have been laid off from a career you spent 20 years building. Perhaps the neighborhood you grew up in has been bulldozed and gentrified. Your instinct is to mourn the loss of what was, to try and dig through the ash to find the past. Apply Marcus's perspective on the dead cities. The nature of cities, careers, and eras is to end. By refusing to let go of your past identity, your old job, your old status, your old relationship, you are refusing to step into the new waters of the river. Acknowledge that your Pompeii was beautiful while it lasted, but accept that it is buried. You cannot live in a ghost town. You must build something new in the present. Chapter 10, The Common Thread, Radical Empathy and Loving Your Enemies. Welcome to Chapter 10. We have spent a lot of time building armor. We have constructed the inner citadel to defend against chaos, and we have learned how to depersonalize the malice of toxic people. But if we stop there, we risk becoming cold, isolated, and bitter. This brings us to one of the most beautiful and challenging concepts in meditations, the Stoic principle of sympathia, or radical interconnected empathy. It is easy to assume that a Stoic is an emotionless robot, but Marcus Aurelius was a man of profound love. He believed that the universe is a single living organism and every human being is a vital cell within that body. He wrote, "We were born for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of upper and lower teeth. So to work in opposition to one another is against nature." The 20% core concept here is that you cannot truly hate another person without poisoning yourself, because you share the same source code, what the Stoics call the logos, or the divine spark of reason. Marcus believed that human beings are literally made for each other. He wrote one of the most staggering lines in ancient philosophy: "To feel affection for people even when they make mistakes is uniquely human. You do it by realizing that they're family, that they do wrong because of ignorance, and most of all, that they haven't really hurt you." Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How does an emperor who commands armies and sentences traitors actually practice radical empathy? Let us examine two extraordinary historical case studies of Marcus loving the unlovable, followed by a profound modern experiment you can run the next time someone drives you completely crazy. Case study 1. The hedonist co-emperor, Lucius Verus. If you want to test your empathy, try sharing absolute global power with someone who is your exact opposite. As we discussed earlier, Marcus insisted that his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, be made co-emperor alongside him. Lucius was everything a strict Stoic would despise. While Marcus was wearing rough tunics, eating simple food, and studying philosophy, Lucius was throwing legendary bank-breaking parties. Lucius loved gambling, chariot racing, and excessive drinking. He even had a traveling entourage of actors and musicians who followed him to the front lines of the Parthian War. Standard Roman politics dictated that Marcus should have Lucius assassinated. It would have been incredibly easy. Lucius was a political liability and a moral embarrassment to the strict Stoic emperor. But Marcus applied sympatheia. He did not judge Lucius by his own strict standards. He accepted Lucius for exactly who he was. He recognized his brother's flaws, but he also saw his genuine loyalty and his effectiveness as a figurehead for the military. Marcus constantly covered for Lucius's mistakes, paid off his gambling debts from the imperial treasury without public complaint, and treated him with unwavering brotherly respect. When Lucius suddenly died of a stroke, Marcus did not celebrate his newfound soul power. He wept bitterly. He loved a flawed, infuriating man because he chose to focus on their shared brotherhood rather than their differences. Application for today. Think about the person in your family or your workplace who operates completely differently from you do. Perhaps you are highly organized and disciplined, and your business partner or sibling is chaotic, reckless, and frustrating. Your default mode is judgment and resentment. To apply Marcus's empathy, you must stop demanding that a dog act like a bird. Accept their nature. Stop fixating on the traits that annoy you and aggressively search for the traits that make them valuable. Do they bring a sense of humor to a stressful environment? Are they fiercely loyal even if they are disorganized? Empathy does not mean you let them ruin your life. It means you manage their weaknesses while actively choosing to love their humanity. Chapter 11. The space between. The discipline of Assent. Welcome, you have built your inner citadel, learned to love your fate, and practiced radical empathy. But none of those tools work if your mind's alarm system is constantly misfiring. The most intimate and frequent battlefield you will ever face is the microscopic fraction of a second between something happening to you and your reaction to it. This brings us to a foundational pillar of Stoic psychology found throughout meditations, the discipline of assent. To assent means to agree to something. Marcus Aurelius believed that humans are constantly bombarded by impressions, initial thoughts, or sensory inputs. The 20% core concept here is that you do not have to agree with your own first thoughts. When it starts raining, the objective impression is simply water is falling from the sky, but your mind instantly adds a story. This is terrible. My day is ruined. I have the worst luck. Marcus realized that suffering does not come from the rain. It comes from granting assent, giving your internal agreement to the story that the rain is a catastrophe. He wrote to himself, "Do not say to yourself anything more than what the initial appearances report. I am told that someone has spoken ill of me. This alone is the report. The report does not say that I have been injured. I see that my child is sick, but I do not see that he is in danger." The discipline of assent is the ultimate superpower of pausing. It is the ability to intercept a stressful thought, interrogate it like a hostile witness, and strip away all the emotional adjectives until you are left only with absolute objective facts. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. Theory sounds great in a quiet room, but how do you pause and interrogate your thoughts when your world is on fire? Let us look at two intense historical realities. Marcus survived by controlling his assent, followed by a highly effective cognitive experiment you can use the next time you feel a panic attack coming on. Case 31. The aching body of the emperor. We have touched on Marcus's physical frailty, but it is crucial to understand it through the lens of assent. Marcus lived with chronic severe pain. He suffered from stomach ulcers that made it difficult to eat and chest pains that often left him breathless. In the freezing camps of the Marcomannic Wars, this pain would have been magnified tenfold. When physical pain strikes, the human mind instinctively panics. The impression is the physical physical sensation, but the story we add is, I am dying, this is unendurable, my life is miserable. If Marcus had assented to that story, he would have been a paralyzed, bedridden emperor. Instead, he ruthlessly separated the physical sensation from the mental judgment. He wrote, pain is either an evil to the body, then let the body say what it thinks of it, or to the soul, but it is in the power of the soul to maintain its own serenity and tranquility, and not to think that pain is an evil. He recognized that a sharp pain in his stomach was just biological data. It was an objective fact, but the idea that the pain ruined his life was an optional story. By refusing to assent to the story, he contained the pain within his body and refused to let it infect his mind. He continued to command legions, write philosophy, and govern the empire while actively enduring physical agony simply by stripping the drama out of the sensation. Application for today. This is a profoundly effective framework for managing chronic illness, physical injury, or extreme physical exhaustion. When you sprain your ankle or suffer a severe migraine, your brain wants to catastrophize. It wants to tell you that you will never be healthy again or that your entire week is destroyed. You must apply the discipline of assent. Acknowledge the objective fact, my head is throbbing, and violently reject the subjective story, therefore I am miserable. You are not your body, you are the mind observing the body. By refusing to add emotional suffering to physical pain, you cut the total amount of your agony in half. Chapter 12. The Poison of Power. The Leader as a Servant. Welcome to Chapter 12. If you look at the arc of human history, there is one rule that rarely fails. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Give a human being unchecked authority, endless wealth, and immunity from the law, and they will almost always devolve into a tyrant. This brings us to the most historically miraculous aspect of Marcus Aurelius and the core concept of this chapter, the active, relentless fight against the corruption of the ego. Marcus was acutely aware of the poisonous nature of his own throne. In Book 6 of Meditations, he writes a frantic, urgent warning to himself. Take care not to be transformed into a Caesar, not to be dyed with this dye, for such things happen. Keep yourself then simple, good, pure, serious, free from affectation, a friend of justice, a worshipper of the gods, kind, affectionate, strenuous in all proper acts. The 20% core concept here is that leadership is not a privilege, it is a profound burden of service. Marcus believed that the higher you rise in a hierarchy, the less freedom you actually have, because your duty to the hive increases exponentially. He understood that the ego is an isolating mechanism. The moment a leader believes they are inherently superior to the people they lead, they sever their connection to reality, surrounding themselves with sycophants and yes-men. To survive the throne, Marcus had to treat his own ego as his most dangerous, lethal enemy. So let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do you hold supreme power without turning into a monster? Let us look at two brilliant historical strategies. Marcus used to keep his feet on the ground, followed by a deeply challenging modern experiment for anyone in a position of authority today. Case study 1. The blueprint of Antoninus Pius and the shadows of tyrants. When Marcus sat down to write Meditations, he was constantly haunted by the ghosts of Rome's past emperors. He knew the stories of Caligula, who demanded to be worshipped as a living god, of Nero, who burned the city and murdered his own mother, and of Domitian, whose paranoia plunged the empire into terror. These men were destroyed by the dye of the purple robe. To protect his mind, Marcus did not just look at the monsters. He actively worshipped a blueprint of humble leadership. His adoptive father and predecessor, the Emperor Antoninus Pius, was perhaps the most boring, steady, and unpretentious man to ever rule Rome, and Marcus adored him for it. In Book 1 of his diary, Marcus spends pages obsessively detailing the virtues of Antoninus. He writes about how Antoninus hated flattery, how he wore simple clothes, how he worked long hours without seeking applause, and how he never lost his temper. Marcus used this memory as a psychological anchor. Whenever the Senate tried to praise Marcus as a god, or whenever his ego whispered that he was superior, he would pull out his mental checklist of Antoninus Pius. He measured his daily behavior not against the limitless power he legally possessed, but against the strict, humble standard of his mentor. Application for today. This is a vital framework for anyone who gets a promotion, builds a successful business, or gains a large following. Success breeds delusion. As you rise, people will start laughing at all your jokes and telling you that your worst ideas are brilliant. To apply Marcus's method, you must establish an anti-echo chamber. You must actively keep a mentor, a historical role model, or a brutally honest peer in the forefront of your mind. When you write an email to your team or when you launch a product, you do not ask, does this make me look powerful? You ask, would my most humble, disciplined mentor approve of this action? You use their standard to crush your own rising arrogance. Chapter 13. The Fortress of Reason. Rejecting superstition and hysteria. If you were to time travel to ancient Rome, one of the first things you would notice is the overwhelming presence of magic, superstition, and fear. The Roman world was saturated with fortune tellers, curses, astrology, and the terrifying belief that if you sneezed the wrong way, you might anger a god who would then destroy your harvest. This brings us to our next core concept from Meditations, the absolute supremacy of reason and the rejection of irrational fear. Marcus Aurelius was technically the highest-ranking priest in Roman religion, the Pontifex Maximus, but his internal diary reveals a mind fiercely dedicated to the logos, the rational, logical order of the universe. The 20% concept here is that a Stoic mind must be an impenetrable fortress of logic. Marcus constantly reminded himself that the universe operates on cause and effect, not magic. He wrote, "To the rational animal, the same act is according to nature and according to reason." He believed that giving in to superstition or emotional hysteria was a betrayal of the highest human faculty, our intellect. When you surrender your logic to fear, conspiracy, or the opinions of the mob, you willingly hand over the keys to your inner citadel. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How did an emperor maintain his cold, rational logic when the entire empire was screaming in panic? Let us look at two historical instances where Marcus had to battle mass hysteria, followed by an experiment to audit your own modern superstitions. Case study 1. The snake cult of Glycon and the plague. During the darkest days of the Antonine Plague, the Roman citizens were desperate for salvation. Traditional medicine was failing. Millions were dying. In this environment of absolute terror, charlatans and false prophets thrived. The most famous of these was a man named Alexander of Abonoticus. He started a massive religious cult based around a new snake god named Glycon. Alexander literally used a large, tame snake with a human-like puppet head to perform fake miracles, deliver prophecies, and sell magical amulets that he claimed would protect people from the plague. The cult became incredibly powerful, drawing in senators and even some of Marcus's own military commanders. The hysteria was deafening. People were paying fortunes for fake magic while their neighbors died. How did Marcus react? He did not assent to the hysteria. He leaned entirely on reason. While the mob prayed to a snake puppet, Marcus relied on Galen, the greatest scientific and medical mind of the era, to study and manage the disease. Marcus organized state-funded burials to manage the sanitation crisis. He passed laws to keep the economy from totally collapsing. He attacked a biological problem with logistical and rational solutions. He wrote in his diary about the importance of observing reality exactly as it is, warning himself not to be swayed by the trickery of the senses or the madness of the crowd. Application for today. We do not have snake puppets today, but we are constantly bombarded by modern charlatans and mass hysteria. When a new economic crisis hits or a global panic emerges, the internet immediately floods with conspiracy theories, fake cures, and financial doomsday prophets selling gold and crypto schemes. To apply Marcus's fortress of reason, you must completely disconnect from the hysteria of the crowd. When the news cycle is screaming that the sky is falling, you must become aggressively boring and empirical. You look at the data. You consult actual experts, not loud influencers. You refuse to let fear bypass your critical thinking. You protect your mind from modern cults by demanding cold, hard evidence. Chapter 14. The Architecture of a Day, Morning and Evening. Routines. Over the course of this script, we have discussed massive, sweeping philosophical concepts: facing death, surviving the loss of children, managing the cruelty of the Roman Senate, and observing the universe from the stars. But a philosophy is completely useless if it only exists in the clouds. This brings us to the practical machinery of Marcus Aurelius' life, the architecture of a Stoic day. The 20% core concept here is that mental resilience is not a permanent state of being. It is a perishable skill. You do not just become a Stoic and stay that way forever. You have to build a fortress every single morning, and you have to inspect the walls every single night. Marcus understood that the human mind naturally drifts toward anxiety, ego, and laziness if left unchecked. Therefore, he bookended his days with strict, non-negotiable routines. The morning was for psychological armor. The evening was for psychological surgery. The very book we are studying, Meditations, was not written to be a published bestseller. It was his private evening diary. It is the literal surviving record of his nightly routine. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How exactly did the emperor structure his day to ensure he did not lose his mind under the pressure of global rule? Let us look at the two pillars of his daily architecture, followed by a powerful experiment to completely rewire your own mornings and evenings. Case study 1. First light and the defensive perimeter. Imagine the morning of the Roman emperor. The moment the sun rises, he is instantly besieged. Generals need tactical decisions. Senators are waiting with political grievances, and servants are requesting funds. If Marcus stepped out of his tent or his bedroom without preparing his mind, the sheer chaos of other people's demands would instantly overwhelm him. So, he established a strict morning routine to build his defensive perimeter. Before he spoke to a single human being, he spoke to himself. We discussed his premeditation of evils in a previous chapter, expecting people to be deceitful and arrogant. But his morning routine went much deeper than just bracing for toxic people. He used the early morning silence to actively align his mind with the logos, the rational order of nature. He wrote, "In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present. I am rising to the work of a human being. Why then am I dissatisfied if I'm going to do the things for which I exist and for which I was brought into the world?" He reminded himself of his duty. He reminded himself of his mortality. He visually mapped out the day ahead, acknowledging the specific temptations he would face. If he knew he had a meeting with a particularly annoying general, he rehearsed his patience beforehand. He did not leave his emotional state to chance. He walked out of his quarters already wearing his psychological armor, fully expecting the world to be difficult and fully committing to being a good man regardless. Application for today. Look at the modern morning routine. The alarm goes off, and within 10 seconds, we reach for our glowing glass rectangles. We immediately flood our brains with work emails, stressful news headlines, and the curated fake lives of people on social media. We hand the remote control of our emotional state to the internet before we have even brushed our teeth. To apply the emperor's architecture, you must fiercely guard your first hour. Your phone must stay in another room. Your morning must become a sacred space for mental preparation. Before you check your email, sit in silence with a cup of coffee. Rehearse your day. Anticipate the stressful meeting at 2:30 p.m. and pre-decide that you will remain perfectly calm. Remind yourself of your core values. When you take back control of your morning, you dictate the terms of the day rather than letting the day dictate its terms to you. Chapter 15. The Vine and the Grapes. Justice without receipts. Welcome to Chapter 15. We have covered discipline, empathy, and resilience. But in the Stoic framework, all of these are secondary to one supreme, guiding principle. Marcus Aurelius explicitly wrote that all other virtues are subordinate to this one single concept. This brings us to the highest virtue in meditations, justice, and the imperative of doing good without expecting a reward. When Marcus speaks of justice, he doesn't just mean courts and judges. He means doing the right thing for your fellow human beings simply because it is your nature to do so. The 20% core concept here revolves around a trap that almost all of us fall into, the transactional nature of kindness. When we do a favor for a friend, we secretly expect a favor in return. When we work hard, we expect applause. We keep a hidden ledger of the good things we do, waiting to be paid back in gratitude. Marcus realized that this hidden ledger is a source of massive suffering. When people do not say thank you, we become bitter. To destroy this bitterness, he wrote one of the most profound metaphors in ancient history. A vine does not ask to be praised for bearing grapes, nor a horse for running, nor a dog for tracking. The man who has done a good act does not call out for others to come and see, but goes on to another act. As a vine goes on to produce again the grapes in season, a healthy eye does not demand a reward for seeing. Seeing is simply what it was built to do. Marcus believed that a healthy human mind does good deeds simply because that is its biological and spiritual function. The reward for doing a good deed is the fact that you did it. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. Theory is easy, but how do you maintain this standard when the people you are helping are ungrateful, or when you hold enough power to demand absolute praise? Let us look at two profound historical examples of Marcus acting as the vine, followed by a highly effective modern experiment to audit your own hidden ledgers. Case 31. The endless grind of the orphan courts. If you want to find out what a leader truly values, look at what they do when the historians and the crowds are not watching. As emperor, Marcus Aurelius could have spent his days commissioning massive statues of himself, throwing lavish gladiatorial games to win the love of the mob, or expanding his palaces. These were the actions that generated immediate applause and guaranteed a ruler's popularity. Instead, Marcus spent an exhausting amount of his reign sitting in the Roman courts, specifically dealing with the most unglamorous, invisible legal disputes imaginable. Historical records show he was obsessed with the laws surrounding the manumission of slaves and the protection of orphans. When his beloved wife Faustina died, he did not build a giant military monument. He created the Puelle Faustinianae, a massive charity organization entirely dedicated to feeding and educating orphan girls across Italy. The people he was helping, enslaved individuals and impoverished orphans, had absolutely zero political power. They could not vote for him, they could not fund his armies, and they could not write history books about his greatness. He spent his precious time and the state's money on them anyway. He was the vine bearing grapes. He applied his philosophy of justice precisely where it would yield no political return, proving that his kindness was an intrinsic duty, not a public relations strategy. Application for today. Think about your own professional and personal life. How much of your kindness or hard work is strategically directed only at people who can help you? We are often incredibly helpful to our bosses, our wealthy clients, or our popular friends, but we ignore the intern, the janitor, or the struggling acquaintance. The Stoic application of justice demands that you perform your duties and acts of kindness regardless of the recipient status. If you only do good when there is a camera on, or when a promotion is on the line, you are not practicing virtue, you are practicing commerce. True justice means doing the right thing when it is entirely invisible and yields absolutely zero return on investment. Chapter 16. The Symphony of the Universe. Finding peace in the bigger picture. Welcome to Chapter 16. Up to this point, we have built incredible defenses against the chaos of the world. But Marcus Aurelius possessed a mindset that went far beyond mere defense. He did not just survive the world, he actively tried to harmonize with it. This brings us to a breathtaking concept woven throughout meditations, the symphony of the universe, and the deep belief that everything that happens is necessary for the whole. Marcus frequently debated a massive philosophical question in his diary. Is the universe just a random chaotic collision of atoms, or is it a deeply ordered, rational system? He concluded that even if it is random, we must live as if it is ordered. He believed in the logos, the universal reason. The 20% core concept here is that every single event, no matter how painful or seemingly destructive, is a necessary note in a grand cosmic symphony. He wrote, "Whatever happens to you has been waiting to happen since the beginning of time. The twining strands of fate wove both of them together, your own existence and the things that happen to you." To Marcus, complaining about a flat tire, an illness, or a rainy day was like a single violin player stopping in the middle of a concert to complain about their sheet music. Music isn't written just for the violin, it is written for the entire orchestra. Finding peace means trusting the composer and playing your note perfectly, even if that note is a minor chord of suffering. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. It is a beautiful poetic thought, but how do you actually trust the symphony when the music sounds like absolute chaos and your life is falling apart? Let us examine two massive historical disasters that tested the emperor's belief in this universal harmony, followed by a perspective-shifting modern experiment. Case study 1. The Great Flood of the Tiber. In the year 61 AD, literally days after Marcus Aurelius took the throne, the Roman Empire suffered a catastrophic natural disaster. The Tiber River, which runs directly through the heart of Rome, burst its banks in a historic, devastating flood. The floodwaters destroyed hundreds of buildings, drowned livestock, and, most dangerously, swept away the massive state grain reserves. Most overnight, the capital of the world was plunged into a severe famine. The citizens were starving, terrified, and looking for someone to blame. Many believed the gods were punishing the new emperor. If Marcus viewed the universe as a malicious, random place, he would have panicked or cursed his terrible luck. Instead, he applied the concept of the symphony. He recognized that the flooding of a river is not an evil act. It is a fundamental mechanism of nature. The earth needs water to redistribute soil and sustain life on a macro level, even if it disrupts human lives on a micro level. He did not waste a single hour complaining to the gods. He accepted the flood as a necessary, predetermined note in the symphony. Then, he immediately got to work playing his part. He personally funded the purchase of grain from other regions, stabilized the food supply, and organized the massive rebuilding effort. He found peace in the disaster by refusing to label it as bad. It was simply nature doing what nature does, and his job was to respond with virtue. Application for today. This is the ultimate framework for handling systemic failures, market crashes, or severe acts of God, like extreme weather destroying your property. When a macro-level disaster strikes, the human ego takes it personally. Why is this happening to me? We ask. The Stoic application is to aggressively remove yourself from the center of the universe. The economy did not crash to punish you. The hurricane did not form to ruin your vacation. These are massive, complex systems functioning precisely as they are designed to function. When you stop taking natural friction personally, you stop suffering, you accept the weather, and you start bailing the water out of your boat. D. Chapter 17. The Forgiving Judge. Mastering the Inner Critic and Conquering Self-Doubt. Welcome to Chapter 17. We tend to view historical figures like Marcus Aurelius as flawless statues carved from marble. We assume that because he wrote one of the greatest works of philosophy in human history, he must have walked through life in a state of perfect, unshakable confidence. Nothing could be further from the truth. Meditations is at its core a book of self-correction. The Emperor of Rome suffered from intense self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and a ruthless inner critic. This brings us to our next core concept, the Stoic approach to failure, and conquering the voice in your head that tells you that you are not good enough. Marcus desperately wanted to be a true philosopher, but he felt that the chaotic, bloody reality of ruling Rome constantly pulled him away from his ideals. He frequently lost his temper. He felt exhausted. He failed to live up to his own incredibly high standards. But the 20% concept here is how he responded to his own failures. He wrote a brilliant lifeline of a passage in Book 5, not to feel exasperated or defeated or despondent because your days aren't packed with wise and moral actions, but to get back up when you fail, to celebrate behaving like a human, however imperfectly, and fully embrace the pursuit that you've embarked on. The Stoic does not demand perfection from themselves, they demand persistence. Marcus realized that beating himself up for making a mistake was just adding a second mistake to the first one. Self-flagellation is a function of the ego. True reason simply identifies the error, forgives the human animal that made it, and calmly corrects the course. Let us transition into the 80% application phase. How do you silence the vicious inner critic when you inevitably mess up a project, ruin a diet, or snap at someone you love? Let us look at two historical examples of Marcus battling his own insecurities, followed by a deeply practical modern experiment to rewire your internal dialogue. Case study 1. The Failing Philosopher and the Rhythm of the Good. From a young age, Marcus was tutored by the greatest minds in the empire. He wanted to live the pure, quiet life of a scholar, but fate forced him into the muddy boots of a military commander and the velvet robes of a politician. In Meditations, he explicitly laments this. He writes to himself, almost in despair, that he will never be a great philosopher. The demands of the court were too heavy, the people around him too corrupting. His inner critic told him he was a fraud, a philosopher king who was actually terrible at philosophy. If he had listened to that critic, he would have surrendered to the corruption of the Roman court and become just another greedy tyrant. Instead, he applied his own rule of getting back up. He realized that philosophy is not a destination you arrive at. It is a rhythm you try to maintain. Imagine a musician learning a complex piece of music. When they hit a wrong note, they do not throw the instrument against the wall, declare themselves a failure, and quit forever. They simply adjust their fingers and pick up the rhythm on the very next beat. Marcus treated his moral failures the same way. When he lost his temper at a senator, he didn't spiral into a week of self-loathing. He acknowledged the wrong note, forgave his own humanity, and made sure the next action he took was a just one. He didn't demand a flawless performance, he only demanded that he never stop playing the instrument. Application for today: this is the ultimate cure for modern imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Whether you are trying to learn a new skill, build a business, or be a better parent, you are going to fail. You will yell at your kids. You will make a terrible financial decision. Your inner critic will instantly scream, "You are a fraud. You should just give up." Apply the emperor's forgiveness. When you break your diet on a Tuesday afternoon, the perfectionist mindset says, "The week is ruined. I might as well eat junk food until Sunday." The Stoic mindset says, "I played a wrong note. The next meal is a new measure of music." You completely separate your self-worth from your mistakes. You are a flawed human being in a complex world. Demand persistence, not perfection. Get back up. Chapter 1. The Setting Sun, the Grand Finale, and the Stoic Operating System. Welcome to Chapter 18. This is the grand finale of our journey into the mind of the Roman Emperor. Over the course of this massive script, we have deconstructed the absolute best of Stoic philosophy. We have built the inner citadel, ignited the blazing fire of Amor Fati, and looked death in the eye with Memento Mori. But as we reach the end of meditations, we must understand the ultimate 20% core concept that binds all of this together. Stoicism is not a list of life hacks. It is a complete functioning operating system for the human soul. Marcus Aurelius organized his entire life around 3 distinct disciplines, originally taught by the slave-turned-philosopher Epictetus. First, the discipline of perception, protecting your mind and refusing to assent to false anxious stories. Second, the discipline of action, serving the human hive with pure, unrewarded justice. Third, the discipline of will, loving your fate and accepting the things you cannot change. If you mastered these 3 disciplines, Marcus believed you would become something practically invincible. You become a person who cannot be corrupted by wealth, broken by tragedy, or intimidated by death. You become a true philosopher. Let us transition into our final 80% application phase. How does this operating system actually perform at the absolute end of the line? Let us look at the final breathless days of Marcus Aurelius, followed by the ultimate modern challenge to integrate this philosophy into the rest of your life. Case study 1, the watchword of Vindobona. We are in the freezing military camp of Vindobona, which is modern-day Vienna. Marcus Aurelius is 58 years old and his body is finally failing him. The historical consensus is that he contracted the Antonine Plague, the very same disease he had spent years managing and fighting. He is surrounded by his weeping generals and his erratic son Commodus. This is the ultimate test. Does the philosopher king panic? Does he beg the gods for more time? Does he cling to his power? He does none of those things. He executes his own operating system perfectly. When his friends were crying around his deathbed, he reportedly looked at them and asked, "Why do you weep for me? You should be thinking about the pestilence and the death that is the common lot of us all." He was applying Memento Mori in his final hours. He was reminding them that his death was not a special tragedy. It was just the universal law of nature playing out exactly as it should. On his final night, the military tribune came into his tent to ask the emperor for the daily watchword, the secret password used by the guards. Marcus gave his final order. He said, "Go to the rising sun, my sun is setting." He then covered his head with his bed sheets and went to sleep, passing away peacefully in the night. He did not fight the river of time. He did not complain about his ruined plans. He accepted his fate with absolute breathtaking dignity. Application for today. This is the ultimate standard for how we must face the inevitable endings in our own lives when a massive chapter of your life closes. Whether it is the end of a career, the passing of a loved one, or confronting your own mortality, you must remember the emperor in his tent. The ego wants to scream, fight, and beg for more time. The Stoic gracefully accepts that their sun is setting, and they step aside so the next sun can rise. You conquer the fear of endings by realizing that an ending is just the requirement for a new beginning. Outro, the final word. We have reached the end of the text. Through plagues, wars, betrayals, and absolute power, Marcus Aurelius proved that the human mind is the ultimate fortress. If this journey has shifted your perspective, please remember to check the description below. There is a link to purchase a physical copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. If you want to buy the book, please buy it from our link. It will not cost you anything, but it will help us achieve financial freedom, which allows this channel to keep producing massive, deep dive content just like this. Thank you for your time, your focus, and your dedication to the pursuit of virtue. Build your citadel, stoke your fire, and remember, you must die, so get busy living.